descriptive of something that actually is, or is proscriptive, where we're assigning meaning to stuff, that question itself depends on whether God exists or doesn't. That is to say, you can't even do language in such a way that you're saying, I'm describing a world that actually is, unless there is an actual world where there's objective truth. Otherwise, if truth really is subjective, you can make it anything that you want. And you can describe, and that's not new, right? This is ancient. People have been saying this for a long time. Okay, that's too much philosophy at the beginning of class, but just know that this question does not stand on its own. This question, this concern, this set of symptoms, these modes of thinking that you're seeing here today in modern Western culture, this is not new. This has happened many, many, many times. And in fact, all this is a different iteration of the same question. Is there a God? Is there not a God? Is there objective truth? Is there not objective truth? Is man set the meaning of the world? Or is there an actual world and man needs to figure out how to conform to it in order to fill in the blank, fulfill a purpose, interact without getting eaten, whatever else. One of the things I would say trivially to say, hey, maybe it's not the case. Maybe we should at least start with the case that there's a real world out there and we need to work around it and not it around us, is there are some things that if you fail to recognize that one, you will die quickly. Tigers, I want to think of as nice big kittens. That works up to a point, then you get eaten. A bus in the street is as subjectively unreal as my own emotions about something else, and then you get hit by the bus. So there does seem to be something to this world, seems to at least impose itself on us in such a way that whoever's doing this to us, we ought to at least figure out who that is and pay attention to it. Okay, now back to the topic at hand. I forgot exactly where we left off last time. Does anybody remember the exact question I said we need to give some more time to? I had somebody asked a question at the very end.
Steve has something at the end. I forgot what.
Yeah, Steve did bring it up at the end. Of course, the guy who asked the last question is not here today. All right, well then we'll start off with new ones on this topic as we continue. Peter, you coming off the top rope early in the match here, or are you gonna? You're gonna lurk, okay, yeah. Then let me ask this: is that background, does that foundation now make it clear whether, when we evaluate this question, and this question is, are homosexuals and heterosexual preferences people? So remember we said last time, one of the problems is, no, we didn't say that. I made a statement. It may or may not be true. Is it the case, I said, people identify themselves in modern culture as being homosexual or heterosexual or non-binary or whatever the term is they want to be. Why do we do that with sex, with sexual preference, when we don't do that with a bunch of other things? Now, interestingly, when you ask somebody to identify themselves, tell me who you are, or tell me about yourself. What do we typically say to people? Here's my job. What else do we say? Like in an actual conversation, let's say it goes further than the first 15 seconds. What do you tell people about yourself?
Where are you from?
This is my job. Where you were from, like basically where you grew up.
Hobbies and family. Kids.
Hobbies, family.
What makes you different?
And in what way would we typically do that, though? Because technically all of those could be differences. They are, I'm from Georgia, you're from wherever, he's from there. Something unusual, yeah. Unusual, unique-ish things about you, unique or unusual features. What else?
Christian.
Sometimes I feel like if we're doing it right, we talk about religion. What else? Anything else that typically comes up? Or does that cover it? Well, we just start with that. Almost always we start with this. Sometimes we go here second, then maybe this third. Rarely do we turn around and be like, tell me a little bit about yourself. I collect toadstools. That does happen when you're in an icebreaker kind of thing, like where the purpose of it is like, let's flesh out what's different about you. But typically, you don't start the conversation that way. Oddly, we get to this last, if at all. And if I said to you, what's the most important of all of these things, you would have listed religion. I do this to say only the following. When someone asks us about our identity, we do a terrible, terrible, terrible job of saying who we are. And in fact, if I asked you to write down on a piece of paper who you are and get it right, like, this is how God will judge you. So you write down your identity, and now that's how God's going to think about you for the rest of eternity. All right? We may say something like that. Wow, that's a big deal. That's something that we really want. But if you think about it, that's what we want most. We actually we would love to be able to say to God, this is how I want you to see me through the rest of eternity. Because this is what we want other people to know. When people ask us, hey, tell me stuff you've done in your career. Which of the following do I do? Best stuff, dumbest stuff, of which there's a lot. Here's the spectrum. Where do my sample points? I'm going to tell them 5 things I've done in my career. Which side of the spectrum do I sample from? As far to the deadgum left as I possibly can. In fact, if I've got 5 events that lie on the left of the stupid line, I'm putting all 5 there. If I can't come up with 5, I might try to make one up. So I don't end up on the stupid line. Rarely are we like, let me tell you the top 5 mistakes that I've made that highlight a complete lack of intelligence, application, or dedication to my job. We don't. We want to put our best foot forward. Why do we want to put our best foot forward? We want to put our best foot forward because we want people to think well of us. If God knows us completely, one of the things that terrifies us about God is this: you can lie to other people and you can tell them the 5 best things you did, but God's looking at you and being like, nope, I know the rest of the story. Right? There's no fooling God, which is why we run away from him a lot, because we can never convince God that we are as good as we want God to see us. Identity has to do with who we know ourselves to be, and ultimately with who other people think we are. Peter, you had your hand up.
How much of what we say when asked is just cultural? We say that because it's kind of what we know people are expecting.
Let's say that the template we use absolutely is cultural. Now let's ask the question of, if we are a Christian and one of our mandates in Christianity is to be separate from this world, different from this world, should we be the people who try to change that culture? When Bob Schull's got an example of this one, not necessarily in the intro point. You're exactly right. Bob Schull talks about going deep in conversation very quickly. He does this with his young men and women over there. So he goes from like, let's talk about clothes and pop stars and whatever else that our young people want to talk about off the top of the head, because that's what's on social media and that's what they interact with at school. And his first thing, I forget some of Bob's normal questions. Vinny, you might remember them, but they're like, tell me how your walk with God is going. Like, Bob will fire that out at you in like question 2. And you're like, easy boy, I'm still warming up on how the Wizards did. Here's Steve. He came back with his, Steve, if you can hear us, tell us whatever your question was at the end of that. Where's the messages? Of course I can't find it. All right.
Maybe it's in the comment section of the video.
Thank you. Is that what I look like? Rah, this is a rough day. Steve, if you can hear us, hit us again. I moved that thing. Ultimately, we want to know, let's just go to identity writ large. We want to know, when we're talking about our identity, why do people who are homosexual identify themselves as homosexual, when heterosexuals never do? Never do. Now, some of that's it's the majority, right? You wouldn't say, when you ask to identify yourself, and let's say you have a boat, and you're proud of your boat, you're trying to work that fact that you have a boat into the first 30 seconds of your conversation. Whereas if you have a car, you're not going to be like, hi, my name's Scott, I work over here, I got a car. Wow, is it some amazing car? No, it's a Toyota truck. Is anything special you've done to it? Nope, it's just a truck. Good talk. Okay, yeah, thanks for sharing.
I think it's because it affects so many aspects of their life. It causes them a lot of pain, maybe a lot of stuff that you wouldn't experience
Yes, I think that's very much right.
In that vein, it's kind of a litmus test of how you were going to interact with them, right? If they throw
Yeah.
that out there,
One of the first things they're asking you is,
do you approve?
Do you accept it?
do you accept me, or are you going to be one of those guys that tells me whatever it is that you don't like? Yep.
Well, I'm not convinced that people will. I mean, they're not going to just like write out like you see someone doing, they're like, oh, I'm gay. Like you know.
No, people have gone to great lengths to hide it for a long time. Yes.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know. Like, I think it's a little bit unfair to just say like they're going to identify themselves directly.
Well, let's say that they don't. The question is, do they think of themselves in that way? So let's say you've got the two sides. The one, the pride flag flying, he's dressed in the rainbow shirt, who's like, this is who I am. Do you accept me for who I am or not? If not, I'm not interested in talking to you. If so, let's talk. The guy who stays in the closet his entire life and doesn't want to tell anybody at all. When you ask him secretly, he writes in his diary, "Dear diary," who does he think of himself as? Does he say, "I'm a gay man"?
Why say, hi, I'm not gay, but my boyfriend is?
Yes, that kind of thing, right? Thank you, Peter. Your wife's in the back shaking her head like, it's awesome. So the point being, when we identify ourselves, homosexuals identify themselves as homosexuals, in my opinion, because they comprise a minority. And you always take the unique position, the minority position. What makes you separate from the big group? This is one of the salient things that make me most separate from the big group. This is what if you want to know what quickly places me, like we revolt against being categorized. We don't want to be pigeonholed, do we? But the second somebody asks us about ourselves, we try to list the top 5 pigeonholes we want that person to put us in. Isn't that weird? What's the best feature about you? What is the best property that you have identity-wise? What do you think is the greatest thing that you have? I'll give you a list to choose from. Your job, your family position, your hobbies, your idiosyncrasies, or the fact that you're an adopted son of the almighty creator of the universe, who is destined to rule over angelic forces that have been at war between each other and good and evil for millennia. Which of those sounds more like something that you'd see in a Marvel movie? You know, if you were Iron Man, Iron Man, Secret Identity, that didn't last long, was it? I am Iron Man. Okay, he wanted everybody to know. That kind of thing ought to make you wonder. Why is the first thing out of your mouth, "Hey, who are you?" You know, or in the same way that you want to tell people that you own a Ferrari, or that you want to tell people you own a boat, or you want to tell people about how amazing your family is. In the first 30 seconds, how are you not just giddy to be like, I'm an adopted son of Almighty God? Part of it is cultural, as Peter turns out. Most people would be like, okay, I'm going to go over to talk to the guy over there. There's no guy over there. I'm going to go wait until there is a guy over there, and then I'll talk to him. Some of it is that, but we don't think of ourselves that way.
Yeah, I think you don't tell everyone the second you meet them who it's protective, right? And that's reasonable. And typically you don't tell people I'm a Christian because if you're like me, that is the deepest part of who you are. And you're protecting that.
From what?
From being persecuted.
Uh-huh.
Unnecessarily.
Unnecessarily. Now, if I had a true understanding of myself and say that this is the Lord that they're persecuting and I'm on his side, that would be okay. But the reality is it still hurts, right?
Yes.
Now, when you translate that to someone who is who's a homosexual, I don't know if what you're saying really applies. What I'm trying to say is, so we surprise ourselves all the time by who we are. I do something, I think, wow, I just did that.
Why did I do that?
Why
Yeah.
did I do that?
Yeah, right.
I have no idea. So we're constantly trying to figure out who we are. As a person,
You got to hold on because you're listing too much good stuff to talk about. So write down whatever the next thing you're going to talk about. But yeah, go
let me
ahead.
throw out my point, the general point, and we can talk about that. For good or bad. Now you have someone who is wrestling with, I'm attracted to someone of the opposite sex. For whatever when someone makes that break and says, okay, I'm just going to go this way, that's an enormous break, and they will identify themselves with that.
And because?
And I think that's even more so.
But because they will identify themselves that way, because what?
Because it's become such a significant issue in their. It's not a small issue. It's not like I like chocolate cookies instead of sugar cookies. This is a big issue, and when you finally say, "I'm going to do this," then they're naturally just going to identify themselves with that.
And why is it a big issue? Why is it different than chocolate chip cookies versus
Well,
sugar
I don't
cookies?
think it's just because I want to be unique. I think it's because it's that internal struggle of I feel this way, but I have a sense that I ought to be that way.
How about this? So let me float this and see if you like it. The reason it's hard saying that you're gay 50 years ago was that 97% of the population was going to look at you with revulsion when you said it.
Sure, and that's true, but I still think there is, regardless of society,
Is it harder today?
Versus what I feel like.
Is it harder today to say that you're gay, or is it harder today? Is it harder 50 years ago?
I'm sure it's simpler.
What's the difference? What's the difference today?
There's a general acceptance, right?
Okay, yeah, hold it, because this is a great Socratic trail to run down. What number of do you have any idea what number of people identify themselves as gay, transgender, non-binary, etc. today than did 50 years ago, even internally?
I don't know that there's much of a difference at all, other than there is certainly a forced acceptance through law and whatever.
Would you
I
be?
still think that's almost irrelevant to the point that you're going to feel an ought versus what I feel, and once you make that break, right, that's a tough break to make.
All right, but the because is the important part. So you said that. I agree with that.
Right.
Now the question is, why is it so tough? Because it's not tough for cookies. It is tough for sexual preference. Why the two difference? Well, the trivial one is there's no moral imperative on cookies, yet we believe that this other one is a moral case. Now let me ask the moral question though. Is it the case that the sexual mores, that the ethics, that the thoughts on what is right and wrong in terms of sexuality are Christian in their origin, or are they more different? They're not mind dependent, they're biological. Do you know what I mean to say? Or let me ask the question better. Do we think that someone who chooses, let's pretend that you choose to do this for the sake of argument. Someone who chooses to be gay or chooses to be profligate and just sleep with as many people as they possibly can, the Christian more says that both of those are wrong. But society, even society that participates in this behavior, will look at that behavior and say it's wrong, while people who participate in that behavior rarely look at this behavior and say it's wrong. Like you don't see homosexuals frequently condemning men and women that desire not to live in marriage and to sleep with as many other people as they possibly can. But yet you do see people on that side who turn around and condemn the homosexual side. These people are manifestly not Christian and may in fact virulently reject or vigorously reject any kind of religious moray, and yet they still condemn this behavior. Why is that?
Sure. So I mean, there are absolutely right. There are moral objectives and duties, or values. There are objective morals, moral values and duties, and there's two aspects of that, right? There's the law, right? That the commandment, God's commandment that thou shalt.
Well, but I don't want to, let me cut you off. Just for the sake of this question, this doesn't answer the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking isn't why does the Christian condemn them? That answer is a good reason for why the Christian might say.
I'm sorry, I didn't finish. So, but there is a, call it prevenient grace, if you will, or whatever. There is an underlying sense of morality that I believe God has placed within us. Otherwise, prior to the law being given, right? God judged people prior to the law being given. Because there is a sense of what ought to be, and
So let's say that the reason that these people condemn those people is that they believe that there's some sort of law written on their hearts. Well, then why aren't they condemning their own behavior? So this side will not condemn their own behavior. The homosexual doesn't condemn his own behavior, but he also doesn't condemn this behavior. This side does condemn this behavior, but doesn't condemn their own behavior. Why? What's the difference? If anybody wants to know why homosexuality is treated as especially different, the answer lies in that question, the answer to that question. So get it, the sexually promiscuous give permission to themselves, even under the law that's written on their hearts. They're like, no, this is fine, it's okay, but it's not okay to be gay. The gay guys and gals are like, it's fine to be gay, and it's fine to do that if you want. Why the two differences?
I feel like we're wandering, but
No, I don't. But I assure you, we're not. This is core.
because they're, who wants to condemn themselves, right?
Well, apparently, the homosexual, neither side wants to. So it's not the common property between the two is neither self-condemns, but only one of the two groups looks at the other sexual behavior and condemns it.
So, I might be way off the mark here, but there's kind of a utility function here. Like, what was the purpose of, A, what was the purpose of sex, right? And B, what was the purpose of God pairing men and women up? It's to make more babies, get married.
Okay, so ultimately you're right, and let me develop that out very quickly into this. And this is going to be offensive to one side at a minimum. On this side over here, on the very left side, is the original purpose of sex. Okay, let that be God's view of what it ought to be. And then as you go further down the line here, and you get further from what God wants you to do, that there is let's say that, and let's just look at it this way and say the following. Jesus said, this is not to do with sex, this is to do with wrongdoing. You have heard it said, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I tell you, whoever looks, I guess this does have to do with sexual, whoever looks at a woman lustfully has already committed, a married woman lustfully, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Okay, now we would say the following thing. If I asked you, gentlemen, do you believe that Christ was making a complete equivalence statement there? And what I mean to say is, would you be bothered at all to find out that that guy that passed by your wife thought about sleeping with her, or would you rather he slept with her? Right? The answer is neither. Of the two, however, one of them is worse than the other. So I think we can also agree that when it comes to assault, spitting on someone is assault, right? Or maybe battery, at any rate. Spitting on someone's assault. Punching someone in the face so badly they end up in the emergency room and need reconstructive surgery, also assault and battery. One of them is worse than the other. So we at least recognize that there are that categories of behavior that are wrong have depth to them as to how far they go. This is the reason that one side looks at it. Now, who will the gay community condemn? The gay community does not condemn the profligate, but who do they condemn? Some of them. Is their sexual behavior condemned by the gay? What?
Child abuse, for instance.
Child abuse, yeah.
Sexual assault, that sort of thing.
Yes. So let's say that over here, that child abuse, just without any further thought, let's say that child abuse represents the worst thing that you can do sexually. Then you would expect to see the next worst group of people condemning these guys. And the next worst group of people condemning these guys and these guys. Now, the first step off the purpose of sex, well, maybe not the first. One of the common ones off of that is guys who lust. Okay, this one is sleeping with your girlfriend. Now, this isn't going to make sense outside of a Christian optic, right? And then here is, you go on down the line, and here's adultery, and then here's doing this kind of stuff, and then here's this one, and let's say there's some distance between all those. You're going to see people who do this condemning these guys and the rest of them. You're going to see people who do this, they're going to be excusing that more than they're going to be condemning that. And they're going to be condemning down the line here. The reason that homosexuality is condemned by more people, and the reason it's so hard for people who are homosexual, is they are going against, if you're right, they're going against the near full weight of the moral responsibility that's written on their heart. And that's the reason it's hard to do. Brian.
I don't know if I can quite accept this model.
Good. Let's put up here to debate, not to be taken it.
Well, so a part of it is, I do think I recall hearing homosexuals that do condemn non-monogamous relationships. I seem to even recall, maybe about a decade ago, in the political discourse, things like, well, you guys clearly screwed up marriage, why don't you give us a crack at it? There's some people who've been in monogamous homosexual relationships for decades. But the other thing is, I feel like you can extend this chart to the left. You can say, there are people that condemn people who have monogamous sex only with their spouse, but they have sex on Sunday, and so that that's clearly shouldn't happen. Or they have it with impure motives and go further left, and then there's people who say.
So, but how is that further left?
Because they're condemning the people to the right. Like I'm saying, you can have a pharisaical view,
Yeah.
so that you keep going further and further until you say, I'm asexual. I'm only about God. I don't think about sex. I think marriage and sex is wrong. We should be pure spiritual beings.
Okay, I'm up for that, if and only if these two are incompatible.
That problem with that, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying, but I think.
Now, let me restate then more clearly. If here's a person who said, and by the way, this was a first century Christian, second century Christian view, and further. Look, if you really get it, you don't want to get married or have sex at all. You are no longer a being of this world. You're purely mental, spiritual, whatever. The purpose of sex, that God's purpose of sex was more like the purpose of divorce. The reason Moses gave a divorce law, which is it's because your hearts were hard. Otherwise, I wouldn't have you doing it. That's a tough. I mean, I'm criticizing some of these early Christians, but that's a tough. It's a tough line to take when you have God say, "Be fruitful and multiply," to men. So God gives the order to Adam and Eve to have sex and have babies. Okay, so at a minimum, you have the left has to include those two commands, which is the same thing.
So if that's the case, though, then what I'm saying is whether or not human beings condemn it is truly irrelevant. The only question here is, does the purpose of sex, is it defined by God's view? Because you can find humans that are going to condemn any set of behavior.
Yeah, so I didn't call this out. Thank you, Brian. All of this view only works in this one is there's objective truth and God is at the back of it. It's a play off of his question, which is there some moral compass sitting out there? Is there some law written on our hearts before the law was given on the mountain kind of thing that is informing the reason that these decisions are making? I'm saying yes, and the reason is there's a spectrum of wrong, and that homosexual sex is more wrong than heterosexual sex outside of marriage, if you're going to agree that there are gradations of sin. If you want to take the position of sin is sin, it doesn't matter, then they are all in the same bucket. But it's not explanatory of why people choose to do so. Then you have to go to something else of it's social pressure, or it's something else, which, by the way, you could make, I didn't finish the point, but basically there are more young people today who are identifying as gay, transgender, or whatever else, because it's popular to do so, not because they actually are. And that's coming out now, so to speak. People are coming out of the closet as not gay in small amounts because of some sort of social pressure. All right, I've been jabbering too much. Let's run just right to left across. And we're not done, Brian. You're halfway down the path, I know, but.
I don't intend this to be offensive, but it may be offensive, all right? So I'm going to take a little bit of issue with the statement about going to the left of purpose of sex. I get the point you're trying to make. I can't speak for women, but I can speak for men. I think an asexual being is not a thing. Like, Jesus did that, and he's the only one. So I think it's completely unrealistic to think that. I think there's countless examples of when you try and cage that or control it. I mean, anyone who's been over to the Middle East, right? They dress the opposite sex up in burqas so they're not tempted. But anyone who's been over there knows what happens on a Thursday night with guys of the same sex, right? To fulfill that urge.
There's a strong homosexual, unspoken homosexual culture in many Asian, Arab and Southwest Asian cultures.
My point being, anyone who takes a vow of chastity or whatever, I mean, hey, good on them, but I think that's about, the purpose of sex right there is about as left as you're going to get. I don't think you're going to get a truly asexual being or someone who is just, I mean, if so, my hat's off to them.
Well, let's say it this way, that in the same way that anybody with the strength to fast for 40 days straight may have the strength to kind of mortify the flesh, as they like to say back in the old days, or at least to say, I'm going to focus my mind not on fleshly desires, and Buddhists do this, by the way, right? It's not just Christians that can do this. You can say, I'm going to take my mind off of this, I'm going to put it on that, or I'm going to put it on nothing in order to stop thinking about that.
I agree that there's a purpose of sex, God's view, and then there's degradations away from that. My disagreement with this model is mainly, I don't see these as being all on one linear spectrum. I think they need to be broken up into separate dimensions.
I will grant that. Consider this an oversimplification.
Okay.
I said, when you said asexual, you're talking about, like, you don't mean
Not having sexual desire.
Like to the point where you're just like so zen that it's like, you're not even thinking about
I don't see it.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure Jesus, popular as he was, I assume women were throwing themselves at him, but he resisted that. I'm sure.
Yeah, maybe. So I don't know. So don't confuse today's culture with that culture. If he's walking around, the reason for his popularity is he's a rabbi and seen as particularly holy, and a lot of the attraction to him is this may be Messiah, this may be, then in that culture, maybe you're right, but probably less than today. Like the Pope is insanely popular. I doubt many women are throwing themselves at the Pope.
Right. But, I mean, it says he was tempted in every way that we were.
Yeah, no, I think that also, I infer that means sexual temptation as well.
Yeah, I assume so. That's a big temptation that everybody else deals with.
Seems to deal with as well. Jeremiah, and then back to Brian, who started this trouble.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm a little bit lost. So, like, for me, it's like, Jesus brought the adulterous woman in front of the Pharisees and said, who haven't sinned for the first stone, and then they can't. And so I guess, like, I'm sort of lost on why, like, we're talking about condemnation in all these groups.
We're trying to, you're right. Let me bring it back together. I'm trying to answer a question that was asked last time that we are working through today, which is, it seems, or I'm at least making the claim, that people who engage in homosexual behavior identify themselves earlier on in the conversation as having a sexual preference than the rest of the majority of the population. I find that interesting. I think that identity, who a person sees themselves as, who they believe themselves to be, is the single most important influence on our behavior and mindset. And in fact, comprises part of our mindset in this recursive way that we all know about, getting stuck in self-fulfilling prophecy and thought patterns and who am I that I did this? That kind, that surprises me. Why did I do this? The better you understand yourself, the less surprised you are by yourself. But the better you understand yourself, you have to be as honest about yourself as God is. And who is that honest about themselves? Because it's a dark look into one's own soul sometimes, and people don't like staring at that for too long. So if it's the case that identity is very important, let's say identity is one of the most important things out there, then I'm interested in why LGBT folks, or let's say, if you're not even talking the sexual spectrum, gender identity folks, because it's one thing to say someone's gay, it's another to say, here's a man who identifies as being as a woman, but desires men. So the outside, you might say to yourself, well, that guy's gay, and that guy would be like, no, I'm not, I'm a woman, I like men. And you're like, you look like a man, and she's like, hang on, or he's like, hang on, I'll fix that. And by the way, don't call me a guy, don't call me he, call me she, because that's who I am. The question is whether why does that happen? And because that's an identity thing too, right? We see that this is why there's a debate about is it moral outrage, right? This seems to be the number one property of our news and culture today in some ways. On the one side, people who say, here's a 8-year-old boy who seems to have more feminine traits and thinks of himself as a girl, and I'm going to encourage him as his parent to transition at an early age, and I'll start giving him drugs and all this other stuff so that he can be a she comfortably. And then the other side says, what about that? This is child abuse. How dare you? And what both sides are saying is sexuality is sacred. You ought not violate it. One of them says this is the way that it works, and you ought not violate it, and it's horrible to do so. The other side says you've got it entirely wrong. That's not the way it works. You ought not violate that sanctity, and this is how it works. The difference there, of course, we all know what the difference there is. It's what's your foundational belief about that. So that's a sharp point on which that question descends. But ultimately, I'm pointing out that it's about identity. Who is the person? Who are we? And it's because of our thoughts on identity that this is a reason that they identify themselves this way, or we identify ourselves this way if I'm talking about in-group and out-group type of stuff. Ought we do it that way? And is there something that can be done about that if that is a difficulty? And ultimately, what should the Christian's viewpoint and interaction with people on the spectrum be? Now let me ask you, and then to Madam very quickly, you, Christian, are in a deep conversation. You've gotten past sports and job and hobbies. And you are now in a deep conversation, and this topic comes up. And you're talking in 3 different conversations to 3 different people. And one of the persons says, I got to tell you, I struggle with, I hear you. I kind of like the idea of what you're saying, but I struggle with that. Culture's tough. There's naked women everywhere on billboards. What am I supposed to do? Another guy comes up and says, you know what? I'm sleeping around with my wife. I don't know that I'm happy about it. Maybe I'm happy about it. I don't know what to do about it. Another one says, I have a van and I drive around and I abuse children. How is you as a Christian, how do you interact with each of those 3? What's the difference? All of these have victims other than themselves.
A victim that has choice in it, though, moral choice.
Aha, so this one's the most execrable because because also with child abuse, somewhere on this end of the spectrum is rape and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, I got you.
Seems like it's more corrupting, maybe? Like it's more
Which, to your point, this doesn't exist solely on a line. There's some branch structure or right. There's some vertical component to this that we're not putting on there. But for the sake of simplicity, sorry, Peter.
Yeah, it just seems like there's more corruption going on.
Aha. Okay. Well, that's the okay.
Child, baby, is just pure, so innocence.
Have you noted the following? If you say as a percentage, and I don't have the data on this one, so that's all right. Not true. I have some of the data. I'm not prepared with the sources. If the number of people who, when they get discovered by their parents that they were sleeping with their girlfriend and their parents would condemn it, become suicidal, as a percentage of the people to whom that happens, let's call that relatively low. The number of people who are suicidal when it's discovered that they had an affair, the number is higher, but not terribly high. The number of people who, when it was discovered and they didn't want to, that they're gay, has a certain level. And then the number of people who, when they're discovered to be child abusers, do so. Or at least describe themselves in terms of being monsters. They say, I'm an absolute monster and should be destroyed. I can't stop myself from doing this. Society, read some of the stuff that some of these guys write, from prison or whatever, and what you'll find is they conceive of themselves as monstrous. Many of them. Some of them don't, but many of them do.
Even the mass murderers and psychopath, rape murderers in prison have a certain view of that, where
Right, they tend to kill, your murderers will kill your child abusers when they find out the guy's a child abuser. Yeah.
they recognize that there's a whole different component.
Right, so all I'm saying is consider, and we don't have to go too far on this one because it's just it's a point in there. I think it's a major point, but it's a point. consider this or something like this with more sophistication as a model. The reason for that is, and by the way, I'm really arguing for the biblical view. So what does Romans say? We ought to look at it. If we're Christians, this should be important, I think, at some point to look at Scripture. People criticize this class of like, you guys never talk about Scripture in there. Everything that I talk about in this class, to my mind, is derivative in Scripture from something. So I just don't couch it in the terms of, let me take you to the verse and show you the verse. Firstly, because I think that we do that too often without thought around its context and about its implications and the philosophy that influences our own interpretation of it. And secondly, it's off-putting to people who don't automatically accept this, and this class is supposed to also be ready to appeal to people in that one. Now, I forget where it is because I'm terrible at... this is talking about...
You're trying to argue for a graduated view of sin, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because it's talking about men who have basically walked... Romans 1, thank you. 24. Thank you. Although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. By the way, this is the point I'm making of, all this boils down to whether you think God exists or doesn't. So, and some people will say, like Dennis gets really upset when I say this, or people say this to him. I don't say it to him often. But he hates it when people are like, you actually believe in God deep down. All atheists believe in God deep down. They're like, no, we don't. That's why we're atheists. But there are also some fairly good memes about like, I believe that God doesn't exist to such a degree that I'm going to spend 20 hours a week online arguing against a fictional being. There's at least something to be discovered there. So this does matter whether God exists. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and darkened their foolish hearts. Step 1. Step 2, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of an immortal God for images of mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Okay, step 1 is, they knew who God was. This is people, right? This is multi-generational. Let's say that's the case. Peoples on the earth knew God, but they did not put God in his proper place. Or they didn't put themselves in the proper place relative to God. In glorying or giving thanks to him, in gratitude for what God has done, was one of the 2 foundational things that kicks people down the path to evil. They became futile, because they did this, they became futile in their thinking. So we're going to talk about hearts and minds here. They basically, and Plantinga argues this one, is that atheism is the result of a cognitive failure. Not brain damage, but the next step up from that. Now, you don't have to buy that, but that's at least what he's selling. They became futile in their thinking. What does that mean? The thoughts, the reality on which they base their thoughts is not correct. And if your axioms are wrong, your derivations are going to be wrong in a little bit or a lot. And the further down the derivation chain you go, the further the mistakes are going to get magnified. So first, they're already messing up their minds. And by the way, this exists in science. I could go off on a tangent on that one about the reasons that we have the conflicting views we do in physics today is because people have ignored there's some fundamental truths out there. We have spent billions chasing a set of quantum computing methodologies that at the end of the day will not work at least the way that people say they're going to work. They will never work by a ontic superposition because that's just not how reality is comprised. I actually think they're going to work, but they're going to work for a different reason. We're going to discover something about physics as a result. Maybe. What do I know? But we will say they are futile in their thinking, and then they darkened their foolish hearts. When you stop being grateful, forget God, imagine your parents. And let's say the parents that were good parents, that struggled to give you whatever it is you had to put you in the position you are. When you become ungrateful to them, doesn't it automatically feel a little bit wrong? And then don't you have to justify why it is that you're feeling that way? And you get into this cycle, this spiral down, and you become a terrible person. That's, on the cosmic level, what we do when we're not grateful to God and when we don't understand him in his proper place. Although they claim to be wise, they became fools. So, hey, this is wisdom for me to do this because we don't need him. But the foolishness comes into this. Ultimately, whatever we are all pursuing is happiness. And they have traded in the way the path to the greatest happiness for something that from the get-go will never get you to the path of greatest happiness. It's a suboptimal route, and you are absolutely pretending it's going to be optimal for you, and it never works. If you don't believe me, look around. And they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of an immortal God for images of mortal man. Now, in the old days, what that meant was idols. Today, I think the modern version of the idols is this. Idols back in the day, Baal and Asherah, were statues that you would go around, and it was kind of like, look, these are the ones who are responsible for the amazing stuff that we have here. Baal and Asherah are fertility gods in some way, and so, hey, the reason we've got the grain we've got, the reason that our society is as healthy as it is because of these two right here, and more, so panoply. When you walk around today, whose images are set up, and to whom do we give credit for that? The reason that we're here is because of Einstein and Edison and and the founders of the Constitution, or Martin Luther King, or whoever it is. Whatever your statue is out there, nobody worships that statue anymore. Nobody's praying to Martin Luther King, praying to George Washington, praying to Albert Einstein. But we credit those guys and gals with us being where we are today. That's patently false. It's just not true. And if at some point we are doing the same thing, and that's what's happening here. And birds and animals and reptiles. I'll leave that alone, but you can imagine some of that. Therefore, now, and then to you too. God gave them over to the desires of their hearts, to impurity for the dishonoring of their bodies with one another. Wow, that was crazy. We went from idolatry and ingratitude to dishonoring the bodies with one another. Where did that come from? How did we get from the one state to the other? They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than their creator, who's forever worthy of praise, right? So religion and philosophy, wait a second, sexual immorality, religion and philosophy, and then back to sexual immorality. He gave them over to dishonorable passions. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. Likewise, the men abandoned natural relations with women and burned with lust for one another and committed indecent acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty of their error. Does that seem incongruous to you? How did we go from religion and idolatry and all that stuff to sexuality, then back to religion, then back to sexuality in some fairly graphic description, all things being equal? Why is that the case? Let me go one bit further. Let me read the rest of it. Furthermore, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, he gave them up to a depraved mind, to do what ought not to be done. Now, watch this. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent new forms of evil. They disobey their parents. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, and merciless. Although they know God's righteous decree, this is to your point, that those who do such thing are worthy of death. They not only continue to do these things, but they approve of those who practice them. All right. There's a ton of truth contained in here. We don't have time to go through it all today. But let me point you to this part of Romans, whoever knew it was Romans 1, thank you, to say the answer to our question is addressed in here. Now, whether we can tease that out and grasp it entirely remains to be seen. All right, we had a couple of hands, and I'll get back to the point. Yes, ma'am.
You said something earlier about what we seek most is happiness.
Yes.
And I question to myself, is that what I did when I was a kid? Was I seeking happiness? And then the answer to me was no. I think I was seeking truth because I found so much. This is what you do, and then I don't do it, and then I get in trouble, and then I see my parents do it.
Sure, but without.
And there was this constant battle of, well, what is truth?
So ground them both in the same thing. We're seeking truth about something. So when we say we're seeking truth, that sounds noble. And I like to tell people that I'm doing that. But it's truth about something. I'm not seeking truth about insects. I mean, that's interesting, but that's not the truth that I'm really after. What's the truth that I'm after? The most interesting the description of the world and hydrothermal vents and subsea floors? No. What's the truth you want to know? How to be happy. How is this world configured in such a way that that I can be as happy as I can possibly be. The part that you're talking about of, this didn't make me feel good, has to do, this truth led me in the wrong direction. Wrong direction for being happy.
So confusing as a child when you don't know God. You don't
Amen.
know God exists.
Yes, I agree.
And nobody's teaching it.
Yes.
So you're thinking, well, that person's happy doing their thing. That person's happy doing their thing, but I get spanked if I try to go.
Absolutely the case, right. And yeah, absolutely the case. I will say, now, by the way, let me back out before I go to Katie, who started all this mess, so you can blame her if you don't like it. I'm just kidding. Obviously, you didn't. We brought in a speaker on this topic. Katie's not the only person who thought we should deal with this. I'm just jesting. I told you last time that I think the right answer to the right answer to everybody on this list. Let's start with the obvious one. The rapist and the child abuser. Let's forget for a moment. Let's pretend that you live in societies where like there's no cops to take him to. So like your first thing is like, this guy just told me that he's a child abuser. I probably need to call the police. Forget that one for a second. You're out in the middle of nowhere. They don't have that here. This guy drives around on his camel or his ox or whatever in the middle of nowhere, and he abuses children. And this is the only time you're going to see him. You're in a caravan crossing point, and he's going that way, and you're going this way. You got one night to convince him to stop driving around on his animal and abusing children. What do you tell him? I don't know, but here's a start. Does that make you happy? And the guy says, yeah, it makes me happy. Does it have any, with the sweetness, is there any bitterness? With the joy, is there any pain? And when he says, ultimately, let's say that he's being honest, completely honest, and you tease it out, and he's like, no, I think that's I wish I didn't feel, they might say something like this, because people do say stuff like this. I wish I didn't have these feelings. I wish it wasn't this way. I wouldn't do this if I didn't have to. But it does make me happy. What you ought to say to him, I think, is this: I don't doubt that you are chasing happiness. You just aren't chasing what will actually make you happy. You're chasing what's going to make you partially happy. There is a way where all of the desires that you have, ultimately, all of them will be fulfilled, and all of those fulfilled desires are good, and they all bring joy with no sadness and no pain. That's actually the state that we're striving for in Christianity, is after the resurrection, where we are not male or female. This isn't a temptation for us, that kind of stuff. And we live in a perfect place. We don't even, all the draws that we have, all the good things that we want, bring us joy with no downside. This guy's joy has downside. This guy's joy has downside to it. And even the rapist, the psychologist can go on and on and on about how the rapist knows that and what that looks like and all that kind of stuff. And the same is true here. We have a friend who's a lesbian who said, do you think that I want to be a lesbian? This is hard. I don't want to be a lesbian. She would prefer not to, because it comes with cost. Now, some of the cost is societal, right? Society disapproves of her, that kind of thing, in some amount. She's working in Hollywood, so it's not that hard where she is, truth be told, at least in that little portion of it. But in the city around where she is, she gets some of that too. The same is true here. The same is true here. I just want to be happy. She wants to be happy. We're consensual partners. Who cares? It's fine. The difference is it doesn't make you as happy as you can be. Until you do. They don't know that, but you do. And that's the difference. You have knowledge. The knowledge that you have, the spirit that you have that lives in you, if they can partake of that spirit, the freedom that Christ gives. What is freedom from? Freedom is not just freedom from the law. That's part of the freedom, but we forget, I think, as modern Christians, that the freedom that Paul's talking about is freedom from the bondage of sin. The bondage of sin is this guy in prison saying, I wish I wasn't this way. Somebody stop me. If you kill me, that's okay. Please do it. Or neuter me. That's fine. I don't care, as long whatever stops it. That's what I'm talking about. Now, these guys don't recognize that as much as these guys do, because they haven't gone that far down the path. Isn't it the case that the people who are the best at giving the speech about don't do drugs are the people who've gone furthest down the path? Is doing drugs wrong? Let's say maybe you think that's not wrong. Is doing a lot of drugs wrong so that it wrecks your life? Maybe almost everybody would say, if it's not wrong, at a minimum, it doesn't make me happy. I lost all my teeth. I pulled my own fingernails off. I lost my whole family. I did horrible things. I broke into places. I did things sexually I didn't want to. All of these are derivative of going too far down that path to evil. This is why holiness matters, is it keeps you from going one step down any of these paths. All right, I've got so many hands because I'm making controversial statements.
I'm always curious about testing edge cases because that's the easiest way to identify a flaw in the theory.
Yes.
So my question is, for these instances of like a child abuser,
Yes.
where they know it's wrong. Well, what about genuine psychopathy? We've got like Gacy, who they interview the guy says, like, no, I didn't think that it was wrong at all, despite the fact that he's doing horrible things.
There's no way for me to give a good answer in a short period of time. So let me give the unsatisfyingly sourced answer. In my opinion, psychopaths are people who have embraced the truth of of a disbelief in God or a belief that they're going to disregard completely honestly. Because the real truth is, if either God does not exist, or alternately he does exist, but I'm going to completely ignore his recommendations for my life, the logical next step would be this. If I'm not going to do what God says to do, or there is nothing that God says to do, then what do I actually want? I want to do whatever I want to do. And if I want to do what I want to do, what you want me to do is irrelevant. What you want me to do is irrelevant as long as I can get away with it. The psychopath just says, yep, that's the rules. Those are the new rules. He's Nietzsche's madman. And he has said, I've sponged away the horizon. God has died under my knives. I can do whatever I want. The psychopath just believes it, and he believes it religiously. That is to say, he believes it properly, philosophically, an honest position. And he got there faster than other people because many of them are more clever than other people, and he just ran down that path super fast. Katie, sorry, I skipped you.
I'm backing up a little bit, but I want to make sure I understand the conclusion you're drawing from the verse in Romans 1.
Yes.
Because it seems to me the conclusion you're drawing is that there are immoral acts that are clearly stated, but also that there is a graduated scale of bad. And I don't see that there. The only distinction on the scale that you've made that I am fairly certain of is the one at the end. And to me, the reason for that is you don't have all participants making the choice personally to sin.
Yes.
You're forcing others to make, well, it's not a choice at that point, but that would be why, to me, that is more bad. But to me, the only graduation here is order in which they're listed. So
I'm starting up here with step one is failure to recognize God for who he is and and showing ingratitude. So ingratitude towards God and not giving him full glory. You might be like, well, all Christians do that, right? Today we're there, right there. Where does that end? It ends in this paragraph.
So is the top the most bad to you?
No, the top is the beginning of evil. The bottom is how deep the rabbit hole goes.
So then being boastful is worse than homosexual sex. That's why I don't.
Yeah. So in paragraph 28, the question is this meant to be a rigorous list in order of how bad it gets, starting at furthermore and ending at merciless? So I don't know that I'm necessarily saying that, but let's look up here. Is it worse to be wicked, evil, senseless, faithless, heartless, and merciless, or is it worse to be gay?
Well, I just don't see that there is a qualitative, clear statement in Scripture that one is worse than the other. That's what I'm saying.
No, I agree with you in many ways. The point with the other Romans passages in Galatians, and I forget what else we saw last time, when Paul lists stuff, he's like, outside are the dogs and the idolaters and the sexually immoral and blah, 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 and the homosexuals. It's not the first one on the list. Not that list is necessarily prioritized, but he groups them together in there for some reason. I don't think homosexuality is the worst thing. I do think I want to say, so consider the following. You might say, well, God thought homosexuality is as bad as it gets because it was the death penalty back in the day. All right, well, what else was also the death penalty? In fact, who were the first couple of people stoned in the Old Testament that we can remember? The first guy disobeyed God's direct order. You will dedicate this stuff to the Lord, and I stole something from God. Death for the family. Everybody dies. What was the next one? This kid disobeyed his parents and ultimately blasphemed God. Blasphemy. This young man blasphemed and gone. We don't actually have any recordings of anybody, do we? I don't remember. I should have checked this well before this point. I don't remember a biblical recording of homosexual being stoned. Not that it didn't happen. It wasn't one of the main recorded ones, and it didn't appear to be one of the first ones. So to that point, do I think homosexuality represents the far end of depravity of all of humanity? No, that's my point, is why have we, the modern church, condemned homosexuality more than we condemn all of these other wicked things that God talks about? My point is more along the lines of, okay, on the sexual spectrum they're that way, but how far off the sexual spectrum are these other things? Is it worse to be a murderer, or is it worse to be a homosexual? Maybe it depends on what you mean by worse. Maybe you look at it and ask this question as a Christian: does God care whether you're a homosexual or whether you're a murderer? Would he rather you be one or the other? Well, when you ask the question that way, it seems silly. We know what God's answer is. God's answer is this: God, do you care? Look, I could let me negotiate my way back to you. I could stop being a murderer if you could just let me be gay for a little bit. And then, after I'm gay for a little bit, then maybe I can do this other stuff. Is that what you want me to do? God's answer is this: I want you to think of me in my proper place, and I want you to be grateful. And when you do that, all of the rest of this will fall away. And you will not have any of that. You will not wish to be a murderer, nor will you wish to be gay, nor will you wish to commit adultery, nor will you wish to lust, nor will you wish to do all these other things. It is the case in my own walk in life. I now wish to lust less than I did as a young man, and I don't mean to, and I can track my own testosterone through life and say that it's a function of, I can see it as different than that. It is a mindset to some degree, maybe completely. I would say it's my mindset completely. But at the end of the day, we get bogged down in we'll try to stop being gay by doing these following things. Try to stop being gay by doing these following things. No. Try to stop lusting after women by doing these following things. Try to stop being disrespectful to your fellow people by doing these following things. Nope, 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 nope. You will absolutely fail, and you'll fail almost every time. I want to stop doing something that I recognize is wrong. Why do you think it's wrong? Well, I just don't want to do it. All right, you're still adrift. Why do you think it's wrong? Because ultimately it's not what God wants me to do. Why doesn't God want you to do that? Well, maybe a couple reasons, but one of them is that's not going to make you as happy as doing what he says to do. Okay, I'm in. I want to do what God says is going to make me happy. Now what? Start with putting him in his right place, being committed to being obedient to him, being committed to be obedient. And by last point, and then Jeremiah, because I know you've had your hand up for forever. I'm sorry, man. So mad. I hate it when I'm in your seat and the guys just keeps on going on, and yet here I am continuing to talk. Let's go to you, and then I'll finish my point. Go ahead.
Well, the happiness argument, I think, is really easy to make, but then they're going to come back and say Stephen was stoned, Paul was lashed. All of these Christians throughout history have been tortured, humiliated. So, I think it's easier to say it, and it's a lot harder to convince someone that's actually.
It's harder to convince, but the truth of the matter would be this: that my counter to them is tell me one of your sports heroes, and they list a sports hero, okay, and you say to that person, when were they on top of the world? How often, just in a single Super Bowl game? How long is the glory compared to just the length of the game, right? The interview process, the hoisting of the trophy, that's minutes. The pain on the field, getting hit by the strongest, toughest, fastest men in the world, and it hurts, is this much, and this is the glory. And yet we think it's worthwhile. And at the beginning, and that's just counting the Super Bowl. The hours and days and weeks and years of practice and training and pain and cortisone and all the other stuff that they inject in you to make all this stuff work, that hurts a lot. It's a lot of suffering for a little bit of glory. What we're arguing for, what Paul was willing to take, was a little bit of suffering for eternal glory. When you do the math on that, when you're like, I don't even need to do the math. That diverges. This one converges. Cantor's got something to say about it. He's wrong too. But at the end of the day, it's silly. it's silly to think the one way and not the other, if and only if you accept those propositions, axioms.
One, I think we're fundamentally always going to have tension when we're talking about this with someone who's not a Christian, right? Because we're coming at it from this perspective. They're coming at it from a perspective because they don't know what they don't know.
Yes.
They think that we're attacking their values and all this. And unless you believe in God and go back to the fundamentals, our thought process is not necessarily going to, we're not going to be able to make it resonate with them. God will, but that's God's job, right? The other thing, I was actually going to make the same point about psychopaths. So I know you're all about like really controversial stuff. Maybe like 6 months from now, when we're running out of stuff to talk about, we can talk about psychological disorders. And
Yes.
how that all enters the.
Yeah, that's as much trouble as I can get in. So yeah, we'll do that too. Peter.
I would read David, or listen to David Wood's testimony, as he is a medically documented psychopath. He became a Christian, and then he was talking about in a recent video on YouTube how that totally changed his recognition and having a conscience, being bothered by doing wrong after becoming a Christian, where he never felt that before.
Katie, did I cut you off at another point?
I do have a question kind of for next time, maybe when we have more time. I wouldn't mind advice on how to talk to those people that are not Christians.
Yes.
Because I have a number of friends that are so far down the rabbit hole that I don't even know what the moral thing to tell them.
Yes. So
Have this exchange operation.
interesting that you put it in the, so I think with your permission, unless anybody's got a major, we'll continue this discussion a little bit at the beginning last time, but what it needs to parlay into is, okay, fine, so what? What do we, pretend you're a Christian, if you're a Christian in here, as a Christian, what am I supposed to do with this now? Great, you've identified some issues, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that vis-a-vis people who are struggling with it but asking my help, and people who are absolutely not struggling with it and don't want my help and are going to be offended by me talking about it. What am I supposed to do? What's my position supposed to be? There is a right answer for that one. We ought to know what it is. Let's talk about that next time. And then, yeah, Peter.
Real quick, in Proverbs 6:16, it says, there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. And not going into what those things are, just for the sake of time, but what would you say is the stronger thing God is against? The thing he hates or that are detestable? What's the stronger?
So I'm tempted on the one side to be like, okay, well, there are 2 circles, one of which is detestable and a smaller circle is hates, and that there's one, so the one that's outside, he doesn't list, you assume it's the last one, which is people who cause strife among brethren.
One overlaps the other.
Yeah. So are all NP hard problems, P hard problems, and all that kind of stuff. That's fun. That's a rhetorical device that is used back in the day. So if the list is 7 long, sometimes you say there are 6 things that are great, 6 things that are good, 7 that are great, or something like that. I think that is a rhetorical device. The bottom line is that list of 7 things: proud eyes, lying, murder, hands that shed innocent blood, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a heart that devises wicked schemes, a false witness that pours out lies, which was also said once already. False testimony and lying are 2 different things, called out in the Bible fairly continually. 10 Commandments have those 2 different as well. We think they're the same thing. They're not. Why are they not? You should know that. And the last one is people who cause strife among brethren. So these are the 7 things. By the way, being gay was not one of them. That doesn't mean that was the list of, okay, those are God's top 7 things that he doesn't like. That's not the case, because a few of those are not captured in the 10 Commandments, which some people are like, well, those are the 10 things God cares about most. No, they're not. Yeah.
Not like doctrinal things.
Yes, that's right. And so you got to treat it as wisdom literature, not as a text on philosophy. Yes, sir. That's right.
To that point, right?
This is a great class, because now we're...
talk about like legalism and like what's the worst and blah blah blah. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. Love your brother as yourself.
Yes.
I think based on Scripture, loving the Lord your God and homosexuality are like opposed to each other.
Now we'll talk about how that works out next time, because you can't say that to Katie's friend and have them be like, oh, I didn't know.
That was not a talking point.
Yeah, right.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying for the purposes of this class and us arguing about like gradations of bad and good and all that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
At the end of the day, Jesus gave us the like 2 sentences that we needed to know to cover.
Yeah, and my point would maybe be this. Homosexuality is not the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. And you don't turn around and say to somebody, well, you got the sniffles and you're nauseated, you are breaking out in all kinds of hives or whatever else. It's the same disorder, but I'm going to treat your part of it as worse than the other one. That's symptom management. The problem at the base is the same problem, and that's what I'm pointing to here. Is that your approach? If you take nothing away from the last 2 weeks, it's this: your approach to somebody who's talking about these issues, homosexuality, gender issues, or whatever else, ought to be identical to your approach to any other sin that they have in their life. Now, that's a generalized formula, but that's what we look for in knowledge, isn't it? Is there a generalized formula that works on all this one? Now, its specific application matters, but at the end of the day, it's all the same problem, and so you should consider it the same problem. Last comment, and then we're out of time.
It seems like everything that you mentioned was those who are homosexual and those who are the God haters or those who are murderers, whatever they are. I think that he talks to the rich man, and the rich man's not going to do that.
Right. That guy's problem was not homosexuality. That guy's problem was the problem that he was dropped into, his context. Look, the homosexual, many of this is controversial. This is not a statement. This is a statement in my own experience. My uncle's gay. I have gay friends, people at work that I know gay, all that kind of stuff. I don't travel in that community much, but I know a few of them. All the ones that I know have had, like this guy said, psychology used to say that homosexuality was caused by, now they don't say that anymore, but it was caused by early sexualization. This guy was pornography at an early age, some people had some sexual experience at an early age or whatever else. Everybody that I know that's gay has something where they were victimized, in my opinion, when they were young. And then it has manifested itself this way. And I'm not saying that has to be directly causal. There are people probably that doesn't happen to. I'm not saying it's a one for one, but I'm pointing that out as a point of interest. And what I would say is, if you're a rich kid and you've grown up in a multimillionaire, the set of temptations that you have are going to differ from the set of temptations if you grew up on the street in Les Mis or something like that, right? That you're going to have different temptations. If you grew up in a California home where mom and dad are like, yeah, you look a little bit effeminate, here's some drugs to turn you into a girl, that's going to be a different set of temptations than if you grew up in Atlanta where, that's not true. Atlanta is now like one of the gay capitals of the world. Rural Georgia, where that's not a thing, okay? So at the end of the day, the temptations that you deal with are environmentally dependent, absolutely. And this right here tells you the story of how you get there. And the way of Atlanta and the way of Rome and the way of Paris and the way of New York, all of them follow this exact same pattern, but all of them differ in where they end up in the paragraph of woe, so to speak. So what I would tell you, I would ask this week, let's continue this discussion next time. Thanks for hanging on and the great amount of interaction. If you are willing to accept an assignment or a request for this week, read Romans 1, especially this back half of it, and try to work your way rigorously and logically through this and ask the question, I'm claiming that this is an order. This happens first, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Either determine whether you think that hypothesis is true and do your own thinking on it, or challenge it and be like, that's not what it's saying, you're missing the point, here's how it works. But let this be your study for this week. Yes, sir, last comment.
Really brief comment is that you need to read in context, obviously.
Yes.
The context of this is the beginning part of chapter 1 and chapter 2.
I absolutely agree, yeah. That should go without saying, but let me say, your focus is on that part, but ultimately understand to whom he's writing, why he's writing, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Agreed. Thank you all very much. Much appreciated it. For you, we have an answer from Eric.